Hello. I hope you all are enjoying the Early Childhood Voices 2022 conference so far. Thank you for your interest in our current research titled, What Do Self-Generated Drawings Convey About the Experiences of Children with Developmental Language Disorder? An interprofessional study. My name is Lauren Hudacek, and I'm a practicing speech-language pathologist and NYU doctoral candidate. I am leading the talk today on behalf of our interprofessional research team. Two very important members of this team are my research mentors, Dr. Christina Reuterskiöld, who has a background in speech-language pathology, and Dr. Ikuko Acosta, who is a licensed creative arts therapist. Developmental language disorder, or DLD, is a term used for children who experience challenges with learning, understanding, and using spoken and written language due to a known or unknown etiology that has a significant impact on everyday social interactions or educational progress. And we know that children with DLD exhibit difficulties producing personal event narratives. These are narratives or stories about an event that has happened to the child in the past. These stories are very important for academic and social development. Previous research and my own clinical experience as a speech-language pathologist have shown that the elicitation context influences the content and form of narratives. So it's important to study different ways that narratives are elicited. Common ways to elicit a narrative could be looking at a photograph, playing with an object, or drawing. Research has shown that visual art creation, such as painting or drawing, is a supportive elicitation technique that could be used prior to producing personal event narratives for this population. So we completed a study comparing how drawing about an event prior to telling a story compared to narrative production in two commonly used methods in our field. And not only is it important to compare various elicitation techniques, but it's also very important to find out what these drawings and stories tell us about these children's lived experiences and perspectives. So the main purpose of this research project was to examine potential connections between the form and content of event narratives and the drawings from children with DLD, so practitioners and families understand what these drawings and stories convey about the experiences of this population. So here's a brief overview of the method. All 18 7 to 10-year-old native English speakers completed 3 story conditions. Condition A, when they didn't look at a visual at all. B, when they told a story after looking at a photograph. And C, telling a story after producing a drawing. And they completed these stories over 3 separate sessions done on Zoom teleconference platform. Each session consisted of 2 parts. The researcher modeled a narrative, and then the participant produced their own narrative. After we collected these narratives, we completed several different analyses. First, for language form, researchers in the field of speech-language pathology completed a quantitative structural analysis. We analyzed how the story was coherent, and we used a rubric, and we also tallied the frequency of emotion words used and the lexical diversity of the story. For language content, we also completed a thematic analysis for the narratives. We coded for all themes embedded in the participant stories. The results of the thematic analysis indicated some similarities and differences. Child participants most frequently told stories about family and inanimate objects and personal belongings across the conditions, as you can see in red. There were some differences in themes as well. Frequently coded themes in the drawing condition were achievements and indoor activities. And interestingly, stories about achievements were more commonly told in this drawing condition compared to the other 2 conditions. For condition C only, researchers in the field of art therapy completed a qualitative visual analysis. Researchers analyzed the drawing form by looking at the size, color, location and position, and time investment when drawing these figures. And you can see an example of this in this image below with the red text. We also looked at the content of the figures and surrounding objects. And you'll see in the green text, we saw and paid attention to what the child actually drew. And then finally, we use these separate analyses to complete an interprofessional qualitative analysis. We analyze potential connections between the structure and themes from the oral narratives and the visual form and content of the drawings. And overall, there was fair to good correspondence for all 18 narratives and drawings in that drawing condition. So we thought that it would be interesting to specifically look at one participant's narrative and drawing to show you what we learned. We'll use the pseudonym Lou. Lou is an 8-year-old participant who produced the following narrative. When I was going to class on my computer, I didn't know how to use it because it was my first time. Then my dad helped me. Then I finally learned how to use the computer. So in terms of narrative form, Lou used temporal and causal coherence with then and because. There was also coherence in the drawing. There's a large centered figure as the focal point. The color yellow is also connecting the figure and the keyboard from the computer and provides an overall sense of cohesion. For the content, Lou's narrative focused on the learning process with sparse detail. And this content was also reflected in the drawing. As you can see, there's no background or context. There are also no lower extremities drawn. Lou added the most detail to the hair, face, hands, and keyboard, which reflects that this narrative is focused on the learning process of using a computer. So this is an example of good correspondence between the narrative and the drawing. So to get back to our original question, what can we learn about children with DLD by looking at their stories and drawings? Well, first we learned that children with DLD drew pictures and narrated stories about family, inanimate objects and personal belongings, and achievements the most frequently. Practitioners and families could use this information to base their stories on these themes and ask questions from these children about these themes to elicit a narrative. We also learned that correspondence between personal event narratives and drawings ranged from fair to good. So there was a connection between the drawings and the stories they told. We found that visual form, such as the size, color, location, position, and time investment, gave us some insight into the narrative structure and form, such as how the child sequenced the events of the story, how cohesive the events were, and how informative the story entailed. The main and peripheral visual content, such as the objects drawn, the relationships between the objects, this aligned with the narrative content and themes as well. And finally, we learned that drawing could be an accessible way to encourage expressive verbal elaboration and artful creation when a child is sharing about a personal experience compared to having no visual or photograph. Thank you to the Small Talk Lab at NYU and all of our collaborators with your help during the interdisciplinary research analysis. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference.